You've brought shame to this family." My sister said it so softly, almost like she didn't mean it. But the weight of it struck like a bullet and landed just as deep. It was summer in Albuquerque, 103 degrees, the air thick with dust and judgment. My name was still Celeste Navarro back then, and for the last 2 days it had been plastered across every group chat and gossip thread from high school to the city courthouse. Someone had leaked the video. Spring break, 3 months ago. A house I barely remembered, a boy I never wanted to see again, and footage I never knew he had. My face, my voice, my body, all stolen, all uploaded. And Marissa was the one who sent it to our father. Ricardo Navarro, retired police chief, man of order, discipline, and a last name he believed came with legacy. I was 19, and in his eyes, I had just burned it all down. He didn't yell. Not at first. He stood in the doorway of my bedroom, fists clenched so tight his knuckles paled. "You think we raised you for this?" His voice didn't tremble. It didn't have to. Shame had always been his favorite weapon, for the world to see you like some disgrace. "I didn't post it," I said, my mouth dry, my voice failing even me. "I was the one violated." "No, you violated the Navarro name." He dropped my college diploma on the bed, a degree in humanities from a school he never visited, in a major he never respected. "You want to live like trash? Then do it without my name, without my roof, without my money." I turned toward my mother. Lucinda stood at the end of the hall, her rosary twisted so tight around her fingers it looked like it hurt. She said nothing, wouldn't even look at me. Marissa stood behind her, her arms folded, her expression clean, cold, neutral, the prosecutor before she even passed the bar. I packed in silence, a few changes of clothes, my sketchbook, the red backpack I had carried since freshman year. The air felt like a cage. When I stepped into the living room, my father was waiting. He placed my bank card on the coffee table like it was evidence in a case he had already solved. "Don't call. Don't write." My mother peeked through the curtain as I stepped into the heat. She didn't wave. She didn't pray. She just watched as her daughter, her artist, her reader, her silence was erased. The first night, I slept in my friend Eliza's car. She offered her couch, but her boyfriend didn't want trouble under his roof. The second night, I slept on the floor. By day 5, Eliza stopped texting back. On day 7, I bought a one-way Greyhound ticket heading west. Portland wasn't the plan. I just liked the name. It was under an overpass in Santa Fe where I made my first decision not to die. I had a notebook, brown leather. Inside were birthdays, home recipes, notes my mother used to leave in my lunch bag. I tore out every page, one by one, fed them into a small fire until all that remained was ash and the smell of cinnamon. The night was quiet, the flames soft. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the bus station and whispered, "I've got nothing left to lose, so I'll start with what's left of me." Portland wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It was gray, wet, indifferent, the kind of city where no one asks your last name and people mean it when they say, "Take care." I arrived with $37, a duffel bag, and a chipped heart that no longer beat out of hope, just habit. I found a room, if you could call it that, in the basement of a peeling 3-story house that reeked of mildew and shared regret. The mattress was stained. The heater moaned in the walls. I paid weekly in cash and kept to myself. It wasn't home, but it wasn't New Mexico either. That was enough. Days blurred. I worked mornings at a diner just off Hawthorne, serving pancakes to strangers I never looked in the eye. Afternoons, I cleaned a pediatric clinic. Tiny chairs, sticky floors, the ghostly laughter of children I didn't know how to be around anymore. Nights, I input shipping logs for a logistics company that didn't know my face, only my number. They called me C. Navarro. I shortened it to C, and then eventually just Cam. Easier that way, less traceable. When I couldn't sleep, and I often couldn't, I wrote. Not full sentences, just fragments. Coded symbols only I could read. My own language, invented when I was 9 and trying to survive Sunday dinners without speaking. I wrote on napkins. Receipts. The backs of order tickets. I kept them in a tin box under the bed. Words were safer in hiding. I didn't paint for a long time. Paint cost money. But one night, after a double shift and 2 cups of burnt diner coffee, I found an old toothbrush and some dollar store acrylics. I painted a figure crumpling into itself, swallowed by a shadow that looked like silence. I hung it behind the curtain in my room. No one ever saw it. That felt right. Then came the woman in the clinic. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't loud, just shaking, clutching a toddler to her chest while an IC officer barked paperwork at her like it was gospel. "Firmar aquí," he said, waving a stack of documents. "It's already processed. Just sign." She didn't move. Maybe she didn't understand. Or maybe she understood too well. I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the way her daughter blinked up at me, terrified and silent, but I stepped forward. "She's not signing that," I said. The officer turned. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knows your form's outdated," I lied, snatching it from his hand. "This isn't valid." He hesitated, muttered, then left. Not because I was right, but because I had said it with enough certainty to make him unsure. Later that week, I was called into the admin office. I thought I'd be fired. Instead, I met Julian Cortez, director of Casa Esperanza Legal Aid. Tall, soft-spoken, and tired in the way only people who fight invisible wars tend to be. "You know most people don't step in like that," he said. "I know," I replied. "Most people still have something to lose." He looked at me for a long time, then smiled. "Come work for us." Not as a cleaner. That night, I sat in the corner of my room, knees pulled to my chest, holding that old tin box of coded notes like it was something holy. And for the first time in years, I felt something shift. Not hope. Not yet. But maybe the start of a language I hadn't forgotten how to speak. I started at the bottom again, fetching coffee, stapling packets, running across town in the rain to deliver a missing signature. I didn't complain. Invisible people don't. They listen. They observe. They make themselves useful until useful becomes essential. Julian didn't treat me like a charity case. He gave me work that mattered and waited to see what I'd do with it. I translated documents, filed emergency stay requests, organized intake forms. I learned what a U visa was before I memorized my own address. The office was small, cramped, always buzzing. And yet, something in that chaos began to fit inside me. I started taking policy courses at night, free ones online, buried in community college forums. I studied immigration law on weekends. I read city zoning codes the way I used to read poetry. Not because I liked it, but because I wanted to understand the language of power, the tone, the structure, the loopholes where silence became law. One evening, I sat in on a city council meeting, tucked in the back corner unnoticed. A housing proposal was on the table. A conservative councilman argued it was too generous to non-citizens. No one pushed back. No one spoke up. So I did. I emailed the council that night. A 3-page breakdown. Sources. Statistics. Lived examples. I didn't sign it with a full name. Just C. Navarro. The next week, one of my points appeared, word for word, in the revised draft. That was the first time I realized I didn't need a title to leave fingerprints. Within a year, I was coordinating grants, drafting public outreach plans, organizing community response events. The people at City Hall began recognizing my face, not warmly, not with applause, but with wariness. And that was enough. I was 24 the first time a local paper asked for an interview. "You're young," the reporter said, "and your proposals are gaining traction. People want to know who you are." I smiled politely. "They already do." "No headshot." "No. What name do you want us to use?" "Call me Celeste." "Just Celeste?" "Yes." He paused. Why the secrecy? I looked at him for a long moment, then said, I've already been seen in the wrong ways. That night, I lit a candle in my room. I had a ritual. Always the same old photograph, curled at the edges, taken when I was 14. Our family on the porch. I had scraped my face out with a coin years ago, leaving just a blank blur where my smile used to be. Before blowing out the flame, I whispered the same thing every time. Be remembered for what you do, not what they called you. Some nights, I wondered if my mother still kept any pictures of me, if my father told anyone I was alive. I didn't check. The distance wasn't weakness. It was strategy. Healing isn't always forward motion. Sometimes it's building a wall tall enough that no one can climb in and tell you who you're supposed to be. But something strange started happening. I stopped whispering. At city halls and courtrooms, in crowded basement meetings filled with undocumented mothers and underpaid nurses, I began speaking with a voice that no longer trembled. People listened, even the ones who didn't agree, even the ones who didn't want to. 3 years after I lied to an IC officer with just enough confidence to make him doubt himself, I stood in front of a legislative advisory panel, debating real policy. I was still Celeste Navarro. Only now, I wasn't hiding behind the name. I had carved it into something else entirely. I didn't run for office to be seen. I ran because I was tired of translating laws that were never written for the people I worked with. I ran because every time a woman in our clinic asked, "Why ora que hego?" and I didn't have a clear answer, something in me refused to settle. It started small. Community meetings, city council proposals, testifying before committees in borrowed blazers and secondhand heels. Then one day, Julian slid a form across my desk. Filing papers. State House of Representatives. You're already doing the work, he said. Might as well call it what it is. I filed as an independent. No endorsements. No family name to back me. Just a campaign page with one line. Let the work speak first. I didn't talk about my past. Didn't mention the car I once lived in or the fact that I hadn't spoken to my parents in over a decade. There were no glossy family photos, no vague promises, just housing reform, immigrant protection, and labor rights. And somehow it worked. People called me principled, grounded, unshakable. I wasn't. I was just practiced. Years of being invisible had taught me how to move without needing applause. 18 months after filing, I stood at a podium under gray, Oregon sky and took the oath of office. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. I wore a plain black coat and a pin someone had given me that read, "No one speaks for us." So we learned to speak for ourselves. They called me Governor Navarro, but I still whispered Celeste to myself, just to remember. Then came the story. It broke on a Thursday afternoon. Local headlines from New Mexico. State prosecutor Marissa Navarro under investigation for evidence tampering. I hadn't said that name in years, but there it was in bold on every screen in my office. A whistleblower accused her of manipulating evidence in an immigration case. A Honduran mother. A deportation order. Everything about it was too familiar, too close. My staff urged neutrality. "You're not involved," one aide said. "It'll blow over." But I knew better. Not because I wanted to defend Marissa. God, no. But because the ghosts in that courtroom had my name too. And silence wasn't neutrality. It was consent. So I booked a flight. No press. No announcement. No entourage. I arrived in Albuquerque on a cool, cloudless morning. No one recognized me. I wore black slacks, a charcoal coat, and sunglasses that hid nothing but habit. At the courthouse, I entered through a side door and sat in the back row, alone, quiet. The courtroom was white, sterile, full of nerves and whispers. Marissa sat at the front, her posture perfect, her mouth set in that familiar, impenetrable line. Her hands, though, trembled slightly as she shuffled papers. Then the judge walked in. Loretta Banks, a woman I had once heard speak at a national policy summit, Sharp-eyed, sharp-tongued, and allergic to theatrics. She looked around the room, routine, until she paused, squinted, then said just loud enough for the silence to ripple, "Wait, is that Celeste Navarro?" The governor. Everything froze. Reporters turned. Phones lifted. Marissa's head snapped toward me. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. My mother, sitting stiff beside her, turned pale. My father leaned forward, as if trying to see if the ghost he'd banished had truly come back to haunt them in power. I didn't blink, didn't nod. I just sat still, because sometimes showing up is the loudest thing you can do. The story exploded before I made it back to Portland. By the time my flight landed, my name was trending. Governor's secret past resurfaces. Disgraced sister or silent reformer? I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The noise wasn't for me. Then came the leak. The video. Pixelated. Grainy. But still me. Still 19. Still crying, half drunk, still being filmed without knowing. The internet did what the internet does. The commentary was cruel. Headlines sharp. Someone even interviewed the boy who took it. He smiled into the camera and said, "We were young. She knew I had it. I didn't think it would go this far." I watched it in my office, alone, hands still. I didn't speak, didn't breathe, just stared at my own violation playing out again, now framed as a political curiosity. My staff panicked. Should we release a statement? We can threaten legal action. We could say it's fabricated, or at least doctored. No, I said. I closed my laptop and whispered, "Let them look." I had survived being seen before. I didn't need to fight the same fire with shame. Then my phone rang. His name flashed across the screen, Ricardo Navarro. I shouldn't have answered, but I did. "You're using our name for attention," he said, skipping even a pretense of concern, dragging what's left of our legacy through the mud. I leaned back in my chair. "Calm. I carried that name longer than you ever carried me," I said. Silence. Then a click. He hung up. That night I didn't cry. I didn't light a candle. I drafted a bill. The Justice Witness Protection Bill. A proposal to criminalize the use of past relationships, family ties, or personal history as a weapon against public servants and whistleblowers. It was specific, personal, and necessary. When I presented it, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't mention Marissa. I didn't have to. Every line of that bill carried her shadow. And mine. The media, for once, listened. Not with mockery. Not with glee. But with recognition. They called the bill bold. Timely. Some even called it brave. But I wasn't trying to be brave. I was just done. The calls from my family stopped. The silence returned, but this time it didn't sting. It rang clear, earned. 2 days later, a text came in at 2:13 a.m. from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Lucinda's in the hospital. Blood pressure spiked. They said it was the stress. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time, the city silent outside my window. By morning, I had a ticket booked. Red-eye. No press. No protection detail. Just me. The same girl they erased, walking back into the house they'd once said I didn't belong to. The Navarro house hadn't changed. Same chipped brick. Same creaking porch swing. Same doorbell that buzzed twice before cutting out. Only now everything looked smaller, like grief had pressed it inward. Lucinda opened the door. Her mascara was already smudged, her lips trembling around a smile too thin to hold. Behind her, Ricardo stood stiff, starched shirt, hands folded like he was expecting a deposition, not a daughter. I stepped inside. The air smelled of lemon oil and nervousness. The dining table was set, enchiladas rojas hand-pressed tortillas, a bottle of red wine no one touched. Every plate perfect. Every seat assigned. Even mine. The chair they'd put out for me was the same one I used to sit in as a child. But now it had new leather, reupholstered, neatly stitched, like they thought surface gloss could erase a splintered frame. Marissa sat at the far end. her posture still impeccable, but her fingers kept twisting a napkin in her lap until it nearly tore. No one said the word video. No one said investigation. They spoke in half-memories. Remember when you drew faces on the dinner napkins? Lucinda asked, voice artificially bright. Ricardo chimed in with, your campaign posters looked very polished. I read one of your speeches. Quite impressive. I nodded, smiled, listened, and waited. Eventually it came. We were thinking, Lucinda said, reaching halfway across the table toward my hand, but stopping short. Maybe you could say a few words to the federal prosecutor. Just something gentle. Nothing formal. Just help. For family. There it was. The real reason for the meal. My eyes moved slowly from her to Ricardo, who was suddenly very interested in his wine glass, and then to Marissa. Her head stayed low, eyes down, like maybe if she didn't meet mine, it wouldn't count as asking. I set my fork down. The sound was louder than it should have been. Final. If I weren't the governor, I said, voice quiet but unshaking, would I still be your blood? No one answered. Silence, once again, did what words never could. I stood. The leather on the chair squeaked as I pushed back. I kept your name, I said, but I built my life without you in it. Lucinda called out as I reached the door. Celeste, please, but I didn't turn back. The night air was crisp, dry, and wide open. For the first time in 15 years, I didn't carry the weight of that house with me. Only my own. The first image arrived at 3:12 a.m., then another, and another. A flood of grainy screenshots, clipped emails, and old photos I hadn't seen in over a decade. Me at 20, crying outside a shelter. A private message I'd sent to a friend, now red-circled and captioned. Lines from my old college essays torn out of context and turned into weapons. No sender, no caption, just the silence of someone who still believed I could be unmade. By 9 that morning, my communications director knocked on my office door with a tablet in her hands and fear in her eyes. There's a blog post making the rounds, she said, sliding the screen toward me. They're calling it The Real Celeste. I read it all, slowly, completely. Then I set the tablet down, reached for my coffee, and said, schedule a press conference. She blinked. Are you sure? Yes, I said. And cancel the flags. No backdrop. Just me. That evening, I walked onto a bare stage. No podium. No teleprompter. Just a spotlight and a wall of crayon drawings from children I had once helped keep in the country. The room was quiet, expectant. We've all seen how power works, I began. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Through dinner invitations, laced with obligation. Through names spoken not with pride but pressure. Through old photos sent at night. I paused. This bill is for anyone who has ever had their past used against them by the very people who were supposed to protect them. Then I introduced it, the Family Transparency Clause, a legal framework that would allow public employees to formally declare familial relationships that pose a conflict of interest, without fear of retaliation, demotion, or being labeled disloyal. It wouldn't erase betrayal, but it would make space for truth. I didn't mention my father, but he knew. The press didn't ask for sound bites. They published op-eds instead. A leader who names the wound before it festers. Navarro fights silence with structure. For once, no one called me a fallen sister. They just called me Celeste. And then everything went quiet again. No calls, no texts, no more midnight files. Until one afternoon, as the sun slanted through my office window, my assistant leaned in. Ma'am, she said softly, Marissa Navarro is in the lobby. She didn't make an appointment. She just asked to see you. I looked up from the notes in front of me. Alone. Yes. No press. No lawyers. There was a long pause. Then I nodded once. Send her in. Marissa looked nothing like the woman from the courtroom. No blazer. No heels. Just a plain blouse, jeans and shadows under her eyes that no concealer could cover. She walked in slowly, as if every step threatened to buckle. I didn't stand. I didn't reach for her. I had cleared my desk of everything but a glass of water. She sat across from me, folded her hands, unfolded them, tried to speak, failed. Then finally she whispered. I didn't know how to start. I waited. I know I ruined what we could have had, she said. Her voice was dry, brittle around the edges. Before I even realized I was jealous of you. I didn't respond, just kept my gaze steady, letting her own words settle in the space between us. I don't want to go to prison, she said, but I'm not here to ask you to fix it. I wanted to tell the truth before I lost the chance. She paused, swallowed hard. I stepped on you to climb higher. I ignored your pain because it was easier than admitting I caused it. And now, I look up and I can't even see the ceiling you broke through. I lean back in my chair, calm. You didn't destroy me, Marissa, I said, my voice quiet but certain. You just forgot I existed. And when someone is forgotten long enough, they remember how to become unforgettable. Tears fell silently down her cheeks. Mom still believes you'll save me, she said, voice trembling. She thinks you'll pull some string, make it go away. I turned my head slightly, looking past her to the tall windows and the city I had helped build from the margins. I'm not here to save anyone, I said. I saved myself so no one could drown me again. Marissa nodded slowly, the motion loose, like her body had stopped resisting the weight of what it carried. Thank you, she said almost inaudibly, for not hating me more than I deserve. I didn't answer. There was no hug, no cinematic reconciliation, just silence, a real one this time, honest. She stood. Her hand brushed the edge of my desk as she turned, and for a moment, her fingers paused on a folded sheet of paper tucked under a file. She didn't open it. She didn't ask. It was an unsigned letter I had written and burned in my head 1,000 times. A plea for clemency. Drafted the morning, I remembered a different kind of call, one made 15 years ago. The voice of a sister I once trusted, whispering into our father's ear. She's the one in the video. The door clicked softly behind her as she left. I sat for a long time in the silence that followed, not triumphant, not bitter. Then I turned back to the next draft of my judicial reform package and began to write again. Some legacies I thought can't be rewritten, but they can end with you. The conference wasn't grand. No chandeliers, no cable news vans, just a community center in southeast Portland, 40 folding chairs and a flyer taped to the door. Statewide Forum on Family Justice Reform. I stood backstage as the final video played, a montage of faces blurred for safety, voices disguised, stories too close to mine. Betrayals not from strangers, but from fathers, siblings, spouses, all punished for telling the truth. When they called my name, there was no applause, just stillness, a silence that hummed with memory. Governor Celeste Navarro, the moderator said simply. Advocate, reformer, daughter. I stepped forward. I was once called a disgrace, I began. Then I was erased. Then I was threatened, not with guns, but with memories. People leaned in. I'm not here to make anyone apologize to me, I said. I'm here so that my future children, if I ever have them, won't feel like loving their truth means betraying their bloodline. In the second row, I saw her, Lucinda, my mother. She sat smaller than I remembered, her hands clasped tightly. She didn't speak, but tears ran silently down her face, the kind that didn't ask for anything in return. Farther back, near the shadows, stood Ricardo. No badge, no suit, just an old man in a plain shirt. Arms folded, not out of pride, just armor that didn't work anymore. And there in the front row was an empty chair. A white paper sign rested on it, reserved for who she once hoped to be. I smiled at the quiet gasp that rippled through the room. Then I said, I'd like to announce a new policy, the Public Kinship Act. or what I call the Family Transparency Clause. Under this legislation, public employees will have the legal right to declare familial ties that pose a conflict of interest, without retaliation, without demotion, and without being labeled disloyal. It's for those whose silence has been the price of belonging, and for those who have spent too long swallowing the truth to protect someone else's illusion. The press caught fire. Finally, they said, a leader who names the wound before it festers. No one called me the disgraced sister anymore. They just called me Celeste. 6 months later, I arrived at a community panel in a school gym. No press, no escort, just me in jeans and a gray cardigan, helping set up folding chairs. Someone handed me coffee. Another asked, "Are you here to speak?" I nodded. No need to announce anything. When it was my turn, I stepped to the front, chalk behind me spelling 3 words: ruthless, leadership, redefined. People ask me all the time how I made it without family support, I said. I didn't. I just stopped waiting for it. A woman raised her hand. But what if they come back different? I smiled. Then I'll let them tell their story. But I've already told mine, and I'm not rewriting it. Afterward, as the room emptied, I noticed him. Ricardo, leaning against the far wall. No cameras turned. No one noticed. He walked toward the front slowly, waited until no one was left. His voice was steady but soft. "I never understood my daughter," he said. "But maybe I don't have to. Maybe all I need to do is admit she did what I never could." I didn't cry. I didn't embrace him. I bowed my head. Peace, not surrender. Outside, snow had begun to fall, soft and slow. Children chased each other through the frozen playground. I stepped into the white hush, alone. But this time, not lonely.